Oda told us what the will of D is already, so allow me to explain it to you. But if you're not caught up to the latest chapters of the One Piece manga, I suggest you keep scrolling. You see, throughout the story, we're giving hints to its actual meaning. Right here, Imu said, "The D is the name of those who once deposed us. Those who bubble up from every corner of the world bearing the D are nothing but empty husks, ignorant of the meaning of their name." However, Imu telling us that the people who bear the name D were the ones who opposed us was interesting because of the paneling right here. Cobra first asked the question, in that case, what is the D? And subsequently, before Imu even appeared and gave him that answer, this happened. We got to see two people who oppose the gods, the Celestial Dragon. When people talk about the will of D, they forget a couple things. The first part of that very phrase, the will. Most are more focused on what the D actually stands for rather than the meaning behind it. You see, many have guessed what the D is throughout all of One Piece history. We've had the Dawn, the Dust, the Devils, the Demons, etc., etc. But there's one thing I do want to place my hat on, and that is the Dawn. Because the bringing of a new Dawn has been a constant theme throughout the story. Whether it be Romance Dawn, where we got the first ever D member, Gold D. Roger, Momonosuke being known to be the one to bring the new dawn to the world, the Straw Hat looking like the rising of a sun, a new dawn. And there are so many more examples of it. Another interesting dialogue involving the will of D was right here with Trafalgar Law and Corazon. He says, "You have the secret name of D. That means you're one of the faithful few, the people of the D." He tells him, every once in a while when another person with the name of D becomes known, the elderly all raise their eyebrows and murmur, the D will always cause another storm. They are the enemies of the god. The bringing of the dawn causes the gods to stir. Dawn in itself is a new light, a new day. When we look at dawn a little bit further, we look at the spelling, D-A-W-N. Remember, at the beginning, Romance Dawn, when we met the first ever D member. And when he started his journey and met Rayleigh, he says, "Do you want to turn the world upside down with me?" D-A-W-M, turning that W upside down. And we'd have damn, which means to be condemned by the gods, Imu snuffing out the light, or damning the gods to be opposing of the gods, the enemies of the god, to oppose the god. But besides the conversation with Rosinante, Law gave us another interesting hint towards the will of D. He says, "The D is an alias, and water is my secret name. For a generation my family has ... and he was cut off. But from this, we know that the D is an alias for not only one person, but for a group of people. See, Dr. Herolick told us one interesting thing that we've taken throughout the whole series. He says, a person doesn't die when they pass on. A person truly dies when they're forgotten. When we talk about the will of D, we always focus on what the D actually stands for, but rather than what comes before it, like I said, the will. You see, the will is a document handing over your assets to a person or people who are going to succeed you. Throughout One Piece, we talked about that theme as well, inherited will. And that rings to what Imu said. Those who bubble up from every corner of the world bearing the D have nothing but empty husks, ignorant of the meaning of the name. Is Roger truly an enemy of a god, or a pirate just wanting to go on an adventure? I mean, we look at most of the other D clan members, most of them really aren't an enemy of the gods. They just do things the gods don't like. Law, on the other hand, did oppose the gods because of the will he inherited. The will of Corazon opposing Dofi, the Celestial Dragon. You have D clan members working for the god. Ones that want to conquer the world are no longer even mentioned. But one that truly embodies what the will of D was is Dragon, the most wanted criminal in the world, who truly opposes the gods. About this point, you're probably wondering, what is the will of D? And to answer, I'll say this. I talked about chapter 1, so let's talk about chapter 1120, the latest chapter of One Piece. Vegapunk said, "Someone once said that the voices of the past will be heard. History is told by the winners, and the voices of the losers at the bottom of the sea are so very faint, but the truth that was gleaned at the cost of so much sacrifice has at last been told to the world just now." Essentially, the voice of the voiceless, the voice of the departed, the voice of all things. The voice of the voiceless can be seen as the voice of people who cannot speak anymore, the voice of the deceased. The will of those people are what's passed on, the will of D. From what Law told us that D is just an alias, and from this moment right here with Sabo, Luffy, and Ace, he was like, "You guys both have a D in your name." He's like, "Oh, that's right. I don't care what my name is. Do you want a D in your name as well, Sabo?" And they're like, "Sat D Bo." Combine that with what Imu said right here, that the people who bear the name D now are just empty husks, showing to me that anyone can truly be a D if they inherited that will. And one thing we've seen attributed to the D clan members is a smile at death. At Roger's execution, he smiled. At Garp's possible last moment, he smiled and laughed. What could have possibly been Luffy's last moment, he smiled. At Ace's last moment, he smiled. From the latest chapter, we found out Dr. Clover is actually a D member. And right before his possible death, his last panel, he smiled. Jack really saw, even though he's alive now, when we thought he all died, his last moment, he was smiling. Everything that Dr. Vegapunk is telling us right now is things he learned because of Ohara. The will of Dr. Clover and everyone on Ohara was passed on to him, but not just him, but also Nika Robin, as displayed right here when we talk about the voices of the past. The inherited will of the D clan, the people who oppose the gods, and everything Vegapunk is doing right now is opposing the gods. And to show that Dr. Vegapunk inherited the will and passed it on, they showed Atlas, the last Vegapunk, dying with a smile. But there were also people who bear the name D, or they had the checkered fate like Sengoku mentioned, that were affected by the people of the D clan. One like Odin, who was part of the Kozuki clan, who has direct relations to Joy Boy, who birthed the sovereign who's supposed to bring the dawn to the new world. Roger even told Rayleigh that he won't die and that he will live on, because, like Dr. Hirlik said, you only die when you're forgotten, and Roger has definitely passed on his will to many. Back to Dawn and Dam. Dawn can be seen as the rising of the god, but Dam can also be seen as a couple things, not only damning or condemning the gods, but also something to split and stop the flow of water. Vegapunk, we know that the world is actually sinking. But one thing that stands on top of the world is Pangaea. And the meaning of Pangaea rings throughout One Piece because Pangaea is also the name of the supercontinent when everyone was all together. Because of the ancient kingdom and Joy Boy, that all changed. When talking about the will of D, it's not just the meaning, but also the symbol, the half moon. You see, because of Pangaea, we know that all the lands were once together. It means everyone experienced day at the same time and night at the same time. But looking at the opposite of D in this situation, the dark side, look at it as people who opposed the light, people who oppose the gods, the ancient kingdom. We know that Joy Boy is not only the first pirate, but also has ties to ancient giants and giant things like Zunisha and 𝑻𝒊𝒌𝒊𝒕𝒄𝒉, possibly continent puller. We know that Sun God Nika was known as the warrior of liberation, liberating slaves and other people from their oppression, possibly physically moving those continents as well, with entities like Zunisha and other continent pullers. Once Pangaea now became split and became a vast One Piece world. Looking at the symbol that was written on Luffy's arm, 3D2Y, the D stood for day. Talks about how the D could stand for dawn or dam or the will of the deceased. If the One Piece world was a Pangaea and they all experienced light at the same time, the ancient kingdom was one who opposed that and experienced dark. And just how Nekomamushi and Inuyarashi both fought each other, one was the king of day and one of night, what was the ancient kingdom versus the 20 kingdoms. Remember, yes, the D has a meaning, but there's also something that comes before it, the will of. The D can also symbolize a half moon or one side experiencing day, the other night. But in both instances, something still comes before the D. Therein lies the answer, the thing that comes before. The voice of the voiceless, the voice of the deceased. You see, in Japan, your surname comes before your name. So we have to look at the things before the D. The people of the Gold family who passed on the will of D. The people of the Monkey family who passed on the will of D. Nefertari D. Lily who passed on the will of D. And the list goes on and on. The voice of the voiceless. The voice of the deceased. The voice of the people who started the will of D, but passed it on. Imu said those who bear the name now are just empty husks, not knowing the meaning of their name. The Monkey family is a perfect example of that. They bear the D in their name, but they all act vastly different. One's a Marine that serves under the world government, one's a revolutionary who opposes the gods, and one's a pirate who wants to just be free. So like I said, the symbol, the other side of the D. So Luffy, Dragon, and Garp all chose their own paths, but the will comes before them, the monkey. And even in the saying, the will of comes before the D. But no, I'm not saying the will of D is the will of the deceased. The will of D is an alias that not only holds a meaning, but also symbolizes something. So, what is the will of D? Well,